Now, something to be aware of is that at any time you can hit Tab and you can leave the ReTopoFlow interface and just return to regular Blender. And you can see that we have the original tree high and there is a new mesh called ReTopoFlow. It doesn't have to be called that. You can rename it if you want. But that, if I go back to object mode, that's your low-res mesh. You can see it's unfinished so far. Now I'm going to go back into edit mode. The idea is that anytime you want to return to doing more retopo using ReTopoFlow, the steps are to go to edit mode for the object that you want to continue retopoing, or should I say specifically the low-res or retopo mesh. You want to still make sure that the high-res mesh is visible. And once you're back in edit mode, you can go back to ReTopoFlow and either click on Restart ReTopoFlow or basically any of these tools right here. Give it a moment and you're just picking up where you left off. So speaking of which, to continue here, one thing I wanted to mention is that as you, let me just go here to contours again, continue with this branch right here. As you continue building out your branch length, just create a little extra bit right there. The branches are most likely getting thinner and thinner as they move from their base to their tip, and you really actually don't need quite so many subdivisions, so many edges as the branches get thinner. You could say the same thing for the trunk too if you want. How do I rectify this? Well, what I can do is I can just keep it simple with triangles, where I can say go here. Now I'm back in the poly pen, and I'm just going to go ahead and just drag one point to this point, and you'll notice what happens is it actually not just snaps the first point to the second point, but it actually merged them. You can do the same thing over here. And you'll notice now that I've done that, I've got a couple of triangles. When I go back over here, double click on these two parts, I now actually have 10 parts or 10 faces, sorry, 10 vertices or edges as opposed to 12 as before. And I can keep on doing this if I want to reduce the number of polygons. For instance, I can go back over to here, do the same thing again with the poly pen. Reduce, whoops, over here. And then maybe I'll do the same thing on the other side. Switch back to pot contours, double click, double click. Now when I draw a new contour, now I got 8. So this is again a technique for reducing from areas of greater need for more polygons to areas with less need. All right, so that's the Now let's get to the part where we start to connect branches to other branches and to the trunk. I'm going to go ahead and complete more of the trunk so I can get closer to the branch here. And I'll stop right there and give myself a little space between the two. So over here, I'm going to switch to PolyPen so I can start doing some refined work. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start, you'll notice I'm starting to push and pull some of these bits of geometry. And you may notice what I'm doing here is I'm starting to line up vertices from the trunk with vertices on the branch here. And this is going to make it much easier when I want to connect these two. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say create a couple of, just a single face there, and then another one there. And then I can make a connection so you can see it's starting to basically become a seamless mesh, a single seamless mesh. Now I can continue like this, say one by one. Now, when I get to here, you'll notice I could create this face right there, but this is where I want you to start to use your sixth sense, so to speak, and say, you know what? this is not looking quite like a rectangle anymore. You notice how this is looking more like a trapezoid or whatever it is, where we got one edge that's really at a steep angle there. This is where you're going to start relying on redirect or using the technique to redirect your flow. Basically, what we got here is we got the flow that goes along the length of the branch. We got the flow that goes down there lengthwise or sort of vertically along the trunk. But then we also have this flow that cuts concentrically around the trunk. Same thing with the branches as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete that face. And rather than create a single face here, I'm actually going to create two faces. So I'm going to create one and then two. Basically, I split what was before one into two faces. And the result here is this critical juncture called a pole, P-O-L-E. Remember, a pole is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or more faces, or if you want to think of it as edges, all intersecting at a single point. This is kind of your bread and butter for redirecting flow between sort of disparate types of directional topology. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Create a single face over here. Just a little more breathing room. And again, I could create one face, but that's what I'm trying to avoid, is that kind of stretched or skewed face. So instead, I'm going to create 1, 2, and then you'll notice I'm just plopping that extra point out sort of here. Okay. So now what I can do is I can create some additional faces. I'm just going to kind of quickly fill out some more of this. Go right up and over. You can also do this with different tools. I'm just going to keep it simple and just do it just by hand. Then the idea is that I want to do a similar kind of construction with poles, but on the top side as well. Now I don't have anything to work with over here, so maybe I'll create something. Maybe I'll just go ahead and create, if not a full edge loop, actually I probably could create a full face loop straight across to this section. So I'm going to go to contours. I'm going to go ahead and just plop in something right there. And I can always add or subtract points later on if I need to, just edit it. But I'm going to just stick with the 16 for now, just to create a little single face loop right there. This is going to give me something to work with. So now when I go back over here, again, I'm going to kind of start to eyeball this and get these two things lined up with one another. So I'm going to actually, in this case, going to go right down here to start to fill in this space. Now, once again, I got the same kind of situation here. You see, I could create a single face right there that's skewed, but that's what we're trying to avoid. I'm going to go ahead instead and split that off into two parts, or two faces. 1, 2, and there's my pole right there. We'll do the same thing on the other side. Just pull that up there. 1, 2, there's my pole there. And I can just start to fill in the rest. If I want, I'm not going to show too many other tools here, but I do love to fill in spaces, the hatches tool. And what I can do, for instance, here is I can say double click with this tool to select this whole edge loop. Then I can select this, shift select this, and then shift select this. And you'll notice it's giving me a preview of all these faces. If I hit F, as in A, B, C, D, E, F, that'll just fill that in. And I can hit A to deselect. I can do the same thing on the other side. Double click, shift, F, and that filled that in. And so you can start to see everything nicely filling in. So that's the gist of retopologizing your entire tree. Just a reminder, you don't want to or need to retopologize the bottom. You can just leave it open because that's the idea is that that'll just sit in the ground. As far as completing tips of your branches, I'm going to go ahead and do that little reduction trick with PolyPen. for this branch, so I really don't need this many vertices out there. So I'm going to go ahead now to contours, double click. The reason I have to double click twice is because it's going to split into two parts. But then when I create another, detwist it. And again, if I want to, I can actually, I'm going to reduce a little bit further along, a bit closer to the edge. So now polypen, I'm going to go ahead and just reduce this again on each side. Keep those nicely distributed. And again, contours, double click, shift double click. And I'm going to go ahead and just go right near the tip here. And just a reminder here, you don't have to create tons and tons of geometry on the tips of your branches. These are actually pretty small areas. The idea is that when you zoom out, they're really not so important, so to speak. So then I can just kind of fill in the top kind of as best as I can. For instance, I might just sort of go up and over, something like that. You can even use triangles at the tips here. You see it's a combination of quads and triangles. And that's it. Again, it doesn't have to be perfectly affixed to a face. You can see, notice that, or shaped the way the original is. You can zoom out here and you can see it. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention too is Relax is a wonderful tool. What I can do with that is just utilize this to sort of brush over huge parts, really the entirety of my model. And what this is going to do is it's going to kind of like fix a lot of problems with your geometry. It's going to smooth out your edge flow. It's going to distribute your faces more nicely. If you have areas of bunched loops, it's going to separate and distribute them nicely. So you can see it's really kind of creating this nice, more sort of pleasing flow throughout. So that's what I wanted to show you in this two-part video. I'm not going to finish this, but hopefully you get a good sense of how to approach creating your retopologizing your tree.